Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Regina Yao, and I'm the founder and president of the Pixel Project. And today I'm moderating the third YouTube session of the 8th fall edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. So through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project collaborates with award-winning best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for our work to end violence against women. And we'll be telling you more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser, which has lots and lots of exclusive goodies a little later in this session. And you can find out more about the Pixel Project and violence against women by visiting www.thepixelproject.net. And we have a very, very special guest today. Who's going to do a live reading, and we're going to have a live discussion and Q&A session. It's the fabulous YA fantasy author, Sarah Rees Brennan. Now, Sarah is the #1 New York Times bestselling YA author of over a dozen books, both solo and co-written with authors including Kelly Link and Maureen Johnson. She was born and currently lives in Ireland, where she's working on, among other things, her series of tie-in novels with the hit Netflix show Fate, the Wings Saga. Her most recent standalone novel is In Other Lands. And Sarah was longlisted for the Carnegie for her first novel and was a Lodestar Award and Mythopoeic Award finalist. Now, Sarah has also generously donated some super awesome goodies to the stash of author goodies that we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. Now, goodie #1 is her Magical Women book bundle, and that will be signed and personalized. So Sarah's offering this fabulous book bundle for one Read for Pixels donor anywhere in the world. Just make sure you give us an address that works, okay? Just make sure you give us an address that Sarah can send to. And so it includes one paperback set of The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina trilogy and one paperback edition of Fate, the Wings Saga. Now, goodie #2, I'm going to tell you all about it, but that one has actually gone. Someone has snapped it up. So it's her book and character note bundle, and that's signed and personalized by Sarah as well. So this bundle includes one paperback set of the Fence tie-in novels inspired by the gorgeous comics of C.S. Pacat, one paperback edition of In Other Lands, which is Sarah's latest original novel, and one handwritten note from a character of your choice from any of Sarah's books. Now, this bundle has actually been snagged by Emma Cuneo, who is in the US. Thank you so much, Emma, if you're watching us today. Now, we also have a really, really, really special goodie from Sarah. Now, if you ever wanted your very own Sarah Rees Brennan story, here's your chance. Now, Sarah is offering to write a drabble. Now, a drabble is like a fancy name for a 100-word micro story for 15 generous donors. So the drabble will feature a character of the donor's choice from any of Sarah's books, and it will be handwritten and signed by Sarah. Now, there are 2 versions of this goodie. So you can get the goodie as the drabble as a standalone treat, or you can get the drabble paired with an e-arc copy of the Pixel Project's first anthology, Giving the Devil His Due. Now, for option 2, if we would highly recommend option 2, because while Sarah writes your story and she'll need a bit of time to write a really nice 100-word story, it's an art. It's a total art to write a 100-word story. You can read Giving the Devil His Due while you're waiting for that story. And it features tales by some of today's foremost names in science fiction and fantasy, including Stephen Graham Jones, Christina Henry, Lee Murray, and Hilary Monahan. Now, all of Sarah's goodies are available to donors worldwide, but there are only limited numbers available, and it's first come and first served. So once they're gone, they're gone. So Anusha has already has already put in the link to our fundraising page in the chat box, so you can click on it to go there and snag your goodies from Sarah. And if you're watching this session on YouTube right now, you'll be able to ask Sarah questions live. Now, just make sure you're logged into your YouTube account so that you can type your questions into the chat box to the right of the YouTube screen. And Anusha, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to read out to Sarah to answer. And now, for the main event, let's move over to Sarah. Let's put Sarah on screen. Now, Sarah, welcome to Read for Pixels. What will you be reading for all of us today?
Thanks for the warm welcome and the great introduction. And thanks to all of you guys watching and everyone helping with the Pixel Project, which is a cause really dear to my heart. I'll be reading from In Other Lands because I thought it would fit in well with the cause we're espousing at this time. So in my book, In Other Lands, there's a boy who goes to a magical land, as will happen in stories. But he's also very cranky about it. And he's like, what do you mean there are no video games? But then he meets a beautiful elf lady. So in this world, elves have the exact opposite experience that humans have. So elven men are thought of differently than human men in that they're like seen as beautiful and they're to be protected. And the women are the warriors and the men are the ones who raise the kids. And my hero is immediately super into this elven lady. And it's like, I'd like to hear more. And it was fun to write that and to think, about the things we assume in our culture and how strange it would be for someone who's just not a part of the culture to be like, no, we do things totally differently. Explain what you're saying. And so kind of opening a dialogue between the two of them and hopefully opening a dialogue between me and the reader where we're like, these things that we just see as normal. Are they normal? So I'm going to read to you. And then Regina and I are going to have a little chat. And then I hope you guys will have questions to ask me so I won't just be staring going. All right. I hope you guys are ready. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, perfect. Okay. So, Elliot, Serene the elf maid, and their friend Luke, who is just a warrior dude, or is he, are on a mission, and they're a little worried they're going to get attacked by trolls when something else, maybe even scarier, happens. Serene reached behind her back and gave her bow a slow, disturbing caress. I think there's an excellent chance of a good fight. I'm sure trolls are lovely and misunderstood, said Elliot, and started violently when the rushes to the non-cliff edge side of the mountain path rustled. Luke! The rushes parted to reveal their opponent was very small. Oh dear, a child, said Serene, moving backward with more electricity than elven grace. Could someone fetch a man to see to it? The group stared at her. In elven society, caring for the children is considered a task for the menfolk, said Elliot, sighing and wondering why no one else ever bothered to read a book. Of course it is, said Serene. The woman goes through the physically taxing and bloody experience of childbirth. A woman's experience of blood and pain is naturally what makes womankind particularly suited for the battlefield. Whereas men are the softer sex, squeamish about blood in the main. I know it's the same for human men. Luke was extremely disinclined to discuss my first experience of a woman's menses. Luke stared ferociously into the middle distance, obviously trying to visualize himself somewhere else, having an entirely different conversation. Serene patted him on the back. Perfectly all right. I should have had more respect for your delicate masculine sensibilities. Thank you, said Luke, sounding very far away. What? You people expect women to tear apart their bodies and then go to the bother of raising children? That takes years, said Serene sternly. The woman's labor is brief and agonizing, and the man's is long and arduous. That's only right. What on earth are men contributing to their children's lives in the human world? Why would any human woman agree to have a child? The more she talks, the more sense it all makes, said Elliot. Guys should help out. Has anyone else discovered that she's making a lot of sense? No, said several of the cadets in unison. Elliot wanted to please Serene, so he looked at the child. Her hair was sticking up in tufts, and her face was stained with the juice of berries. She seemed altogether a sticky proposition. Elliot wasn't used to the company of any children younger than himself, but he'd read you were meant to praise them and pat them on the head. Well done for not eating any poisonous berries, he said, patting. Unless they were slow-acting poison, of course. The child opened her mouth and gave a howl. Elliot snatched his hand back and jumped away. Elliot, said Luke, you're not supposed to pat children on the face. Who knew? So that's a little taster of how the elves deal with men and children. I hope you enjoyed it.
Makes so much sense, though.
I think so. Not that I should pat children on the face. I don't.
All right. So that is a gorgeous, gorgeous reading. What I found when I read your books is the sense of humor. The sense of humor is always there. So let's get started with today's discussion. So your books feature plenty of fantastic female protagonists like Cammy Glass from the LYNBURN Legacy trilogy and Sabrina Spellman from the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina trilogy. And they are all complex characters with agency and are very human and flawed. So what or who are your inspirations for the original female characters that you created, such as Cammy?
Well, with Cammy, I was thinking that, Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice? Jane Austen said that she had created in Elizabeth Bennet just someone who was the most delightful person she could think of to hang out with. She didn't say hang out because Jane Austen didn't say hang out, but that's what I took it to mean. She was just like, who would I really like to sit down and have tea and a crumpet with? And so I was thinking, if I would like to hang out with this person, perhaps, I'm sorry, I have a little interruption. Whoa.
Oh, so adorable.
Anyway, we're working. Go away, Miss Jada. There we have it. Show cat, the experience of the pandemic. I was just thinking that if I really wanted to hang out with this girl, I hope that my readers would think so too. And I didn't want to stop myself and be like, oh, is she too likable? Is she not relatable? I was just like, let's design someone who would be a really fun friend. And then let's think about the girls that I have the most fun with in stories. And they're often sassy journalist ladies. I always loved Lois Lane in all of the versions of Superbad I ever read. And I was like, and I also love the stories of sassy reporters in real life. There's one lady, a very famous journalist who went around the world in 80 days in a balloon to prove that it could be done, like in the book. And halfway through, she sent her publisher something I hope I get to send my publisher one day, which is just like, she's like, hi, I need more money. I've just bought a monkey. It's like, I'm just in my air balloon with a monkey. I'm having a good time. So it's like, that's a way to get a story. If you have a girl chasing a story, then she's going to be the amazing star of a story. So thinking about women characters there, being like people that you want to hang out with, and if they're people you want to hang out with, they're also people who have flaws. Like you don't want to sit there with a perfect person. You're like, oh well, I have a problem. You don't though, because you're great. We don't like those people. Okay, I have some friends who are almost perfect, but almost is the operative word. Yeah. And to think about the stories that you really love and the women that we love in them. But also, one writing tip I received was think of a story and then gender flip all the characters in it and then see what you get. That might be exciting. You don't know what is in the back of your mind. There's, for instance, in a symphony orchestra a few years back, they were like, we're going to try to go completely blind on auditions because we have like more men than women in our orchestra. So they put up a big curtain and they were like, so we won't be able to see them. And then they were still hiring more men and they were like, well, maybe men are just better at this, better at the trumpet, better lungs. And then someone was like, let's put down a carpet. And they put down the carpet And suddenly they were hiring even men and women because they were hearing the women's heels on the floor. And so they didn't realize that they had been subconsciously influenced just by that little sound, even though they were trying to be even. So if you think of a story and you gender flip it, that's how you get things like the movie Alien, in which the lady who battles the alien was meant to be a guy in the original script, but she's one of the most iconic female characters of all time. Just being like, don't hold yourself back through your own misconceptions. Try all the ways you can think of to open the mind. Lay down the carpet in your brain, basically.
Yeah. So you also write female characters that are based on other IPs such as Sabrina, Spellman, and the girls from Winx. How is writing stories for female characters for high-profile IPs different from writing your own female characters?
Well, it is definitely different in that, if I was like, I think that somebody should do a murder, and they're not the kind of character who would do that, they're like, stop, you have to stop. But you talk with people, and it's also really interesting to talk to people and hear about their conceptions of the characters. Like, I remember having a few messages with Kiernan Shipka, who was the lady who played Sabrina. And she was like, I always think about Sabrina as a fixer. And I was like, that makes so much sense. She is always like, I've got magic, I'll fix this. And she causes, terrible trouble. But when you see the motive behind it, that she's really trying to make everything better, then you're just like, oh, it's all so sympathetic. Look, I think everyone was very judgmental about like her baby causing the destruction of the world or raising the dead. She means so well. And so having other people to love and appreciate and think deeply about the character, because I do think if we're thinking deeply about characters, you don't get shallow portrayals, and people are less able to dismiss them. And so in Sabrina, I really love that she's has a female-dominated family. We have very strong-minded women in my family. I'm the quiet daughter. You'll be horrified to hear. And so I really loved writing Sabrina and her aunt. And in the Winx saga, it's very much about really different girls finding friendship through, just being roommates and having to like live together with other girls. And that experience of being like, I'm finding out who I am and they're finding who they are, and we're inevitably going to clash, but that's okay. That like female friendship should be complicated, and that the clashes are okay if you work it out and talk it out. Because I also don't like the idea of a female friendship as like seen as someone's like, oh, well, women are catty to each other. And I'm like, well, if that's all you ever portray, that's terrible. But women should get to be 3D characters and have disagreements, whether they're on a small or an epic scale as well.
Yeah, and the Sabrina and the girls from Winx, they're all already established as pretty feminist and badass. So did that factor into your decision to accept the opportunity to write their stories and contribute to their story walls?
Definitely. That's why I was a longtime fan of Sabrina when I was asked, so I was really excited to do it. And then I wasn't familiar with Winx, but it was filming down the road from me in a castle that I'd been to before. And so I was like, who's going to be in it? Oh, and the star, Abigail Cowan, was previously on Sabrina, so I knew her a little bit. And I was like, I think she's just going to do great with whatever character she's given. And when I looked up things about Winx, I saw people being really passionate about the girls and their friendships. And I was like, this is what I want to be part of. But also, so I was really nervous not to mess up. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, because one thing that we've noticed is that female friendships, or at least great portrayals of them in fantasy, is still not as common as male friendships.
It's true. People love bromance. And I love bromance. I mean, I love friendships of all sorts. And I know that we'd like to see men, because sexism is bad for men too. In toxic masculinity, we don't see men being like able to be that open with each other. So the idea of a man being really open emotionally and invested in his friendship or invested in his romance is really alluring to us, because we're not seeing enough of that in real life. Because men are taught, shut it down. I don't have a feeling. I would never have a feeling. But like at the same time, women have find supports in other ways. We're taught to be more social. And so like almost every woman I know has these like interconnected friendships they lean on. One of my friends was like, oh, my marriage got a lot better when I realized I couldn't look to just him to fulfill all my needs like the stories tell you. That my friends were going to fulfill some stuff that he just couldn't. And there are older women I know who are in their 80s, and they've been friends with some of their same friends since before they were teenagers, and they are the constants who've shaped their lives. So thinking about how women shape your lives and your world means that, it validates their importance, and it should be portrayed more.
Yeah, and many authors, including some YA and fantasy authors, still have trouble writing stories that pass the Bechdel test, despite the fact that there are many more things that and matters that women and girls talk about other than men and boys. Why do you think that's the case?
I mean, I think romance is like a very interesting thing. And of course, the Bechdel test was made by a lesbian writer and artist. And so this could be solved by having more lady romances and people discussing them. But romance is like a thing that you gossip about a lot, and that means gossiping about boys. But of course, also you talk about your job and you talk about your problems. So I think it's another situation of like the Bechdel test is a flawed test, but it was created because these things weren't happening because women weren't 3D, so they wouldn't think about them as they would think about them as relating to the men, and so their conversations would be naturally spanning out from the center of the story, which was often a man, as opposed to this is a story about a lady and say like her problem being chased by a dragon, and if she has a friend, she's going to be like, so how about that dragon? I really think it's a big problem, and that's just going to naturally occur. So I'm just like, I think if you're not passing the Bechdel test, you want to think, why not? Rather than like, oh, I got to pass it. Let me just shove in a little bit where they're like, so cotton wool, it's a pretty cool invention. Agreed, Betty.
Hmm. So, what can you suggest for writers who want to write female conversations and relationships like female friendships realistically?
Well, something I used to do, and not anymore because the pandemic, I would go, and this is creepy, guys, so sorry, go on the bus and be like listening with my headphones, and I'm like, oh no, I'm just listening to a music. Everything's fine. But I wasn't listening to music, I was listening to them talk. And that was a good insight into like just having a cross section of like women on the bus on their way being like, here are my thoughts about this, and then find writers that you really love and characters that you really love and see how they talk to each other and think about why was this conversation memorable. And again, I really think that the idea of just as a thought experiment, gender flipping all your characters and being like, if these two guys are allowed to have a talk about, say, the war and how that affected them, or their dad and how their relationship affected them, then perhaps women can talk about their mom or their dad, because like we both got both parents. The ideas of like mommy issues and daddy issues being gender segregated, not so much. Also, you're like your non-binary parent. Are they giving you hassle?
Yeah. So, when you write your female characters, do you ever feel pressured by gender and cultural stereotypes to make them likable or relatable? And do you ever get any flack for not making a female character likable enough? Because we've heard from this is interesting. I'm going to preface this to give it context. Why we asked this is because this has cropped up in our conversations with authors on our live streams over the years. And what we found is female authors experience that more from their fans, as in they get told off for not making a female character likable enough, but male authors don't seem to realize anything. They don't seem to get any blowback. So what's your experience?
I mean, yeah, because we're all socialized to criticize women a little more, to think, what do they look like? Are they treating the men in their life right? Are they earning their place? Because men's place is seen as like automatically granted to them, and women have to earn it. So people are unconsciously doing that, being like, are you behaving right? And sometimes I do get really worried. I write a female character, I'm like, are people gonna hate her? Maybe I can't let her do this. And without men have more freedom. I'm like, oh, they can just do a terrible thing. People will forgive them. It'll be okay. But at the same time, that's trammeling my female characters and not letting them have the breadth of experience. So it's a thing that I'm conscious of, but I also try to fight against, because also like you don't want to create a milk toast person. I love a wicked lady. I would really like to write more like cool villainesses as well as many other kinds of girls. And to get that voice out of your head. And like someone in the publishing industry did say it to me. They were just like, look, people like boys more. And like in the books I've written, which have male protagonists, they get more awards. So it's really hard to get that out of your head, the voice but it's also a voice in everyone's head. And I'm like, just talking about it more is valuable. Having people think about how they respond is valuable. And occasionally just being like, I'm just going to let a girl loose. She can do whatever. I'll think about the consequences later. Is like, let your imagination run free for women as much as you do for men is like big writing advice for me that I should take more often myself.
All right. So before we move on to the next part of the discussion, let's put some of the really, really awesome comments and questions from the audience on screen. So from Christiana Cheryl, she says, Cami Glass is the best and should hang out with Maureen Johnson, Stevie Bell, and be part of the best teen sleuth duo of all time.
That is such a good idea. I love Maureen Johnson. She is one of the funniest women I know. I was once at a wedding and someone was sitting next to me like, so you're a YA author? And I was like, yes. And she was like, I don't read YA books. And I was like, that's okay. And she's like, but I do read Maureen Johnson's Twitter. Can you imagine being friends with her? And I was like, seems like it would be good. Because, I don't know what to say. But I think Stevie is amazing and she and Cami would super get on. And I would love to see two teen sleuths doing their own thing and occasionally being like, no, we'll sneak him in the dumbwaiter. No, I'm going to wear a costume. I think that would be such a fun, chaotic duo. I'm in. Let's write it, Maureen.
All right. So there are questions from Devilish Aggie. So let's put Devilish Aggie's question on screen. So is there any chance that your next Wings novel, Lighting the Fire, contains an Easter egg referencing to Bloom's past life as a witch who wears her hair in a braid and lace-colored dark dresses?
I mean, there are Easter eggs, but of various kinds, because I also wanted to be very respectful of the cartoon fans for Wings. And so in the Lighting the Fire is a prequel, so it fills you in on all the stuff that happened to them before. So we do get to see Bloom before she finds out about her fairy heritage and before she goes to school. And perhaps she could have like a little, as a treat, a little more of a gothier inclination. But it was mostly really fun to think about how she gets to the point in the story she is. And I have some sections from the adult's point of view, and for her point of view, it's her mother, and thinking about what do you do with your fairy changeling child that you don't quite know is your fairy changeling child, but you know something's up. So again, it was really fun to write a relationship between women which has like both traditional elements and like the supernatural elements, which can sometimes cast a light on the way we all feel about the women in our lives.
Right. And Fer Bouvier says, I love your books.
Thank you.
And everyone, there's a whole list. I'm not going to share them, but there's a whole lot of comments here about Kitty, cat. Oh, so cute. Guest starring Sarah's cat.
If she comes by again, I'll hold her up again. She likes it. She feels like a star. She's like the most beautiful person in the house. So sometimes in a very unfeminist way, I will tease her about being a bimbo, like when she gets trapped on the stairs and is like, I'm all alone. Everyone's left me. And I'm like, no, we're just in other rooms. Hey, come on.
Okay, and so one more question from the audience before we go on to talk about men in your books. So Lucy Goujon, apart from tie-in projects, are you working on something new? Can you tease us?
Ooh, Lucy, all right. Well, I've just finished a book that's in with my agent. And actually, I was talking earlier about wanting to write a villainess, and it is about a girl who wakes up in her favorite fantasy novel as the villainess who is slated to die pretty soon. She's the wicked stepsister. And it's about her. She's always liked villains in books. And she's like, what if we kind of unionize? She gets all the minor villains of the book and they form like a little villain team. And it was fun to think about, the kind of lady who's thought of as villainous. She's like, I've got a very low cut dress. My eyeliner is pretty good now. But also like, about togetherness, about the bonds you can form. And she and another villain perform a musical number about evil being kind of sexy. And okay, that's all I can tell you about that. But it was really fun to write, and I hope you guys get to read it soon.
All
Thanks.
right. So now let's talk about your male characters. So specifically about writing male characters, because you write some wonderfully well-rounded male characters who defy masculine stereotypes. And so, who or what are your inspiration for your male characters?
The boys in my life, I should say as well, they're a great support to me. A few years ago, I was sick. I had cancer, and my baby brother, who is 6'4" and like built, he would come and care for me. He shaved my head and put on a little unicorn hat for me. So, like, the idea of men not being caretakers is, having received that kind of care again, is terrible to me. And some women who were going through the same experience as I were saying that the men in their lives weren't as supportive because they hadn't been trained to be supportive. Like, some of them wanted to help, some of them didn't want to help because that kind of wasn't their place. But it was really having my brother be so good, and I would faint often. I would just go down like a tree. I'd be like, blah, 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 and then go over sideways. And he would leap across like whole rooms and always catch me whenever he was in the room. And just so having seen that, I'm like, I know you can, guys. And just believe in yourselves more. And we have to believe in them, but also expect it of them. Because if someone you love in your life is sick, you want to be there for them. They want to be there for you. Just being better to each other, but realizing also that don't hold people to different standards. And I love writing men who are caretakers. In the Sabrina books, I actually was like, well, we have a lot of the ladies in the show, so let's see some of the boys in our lives and see that they're longing for love or wanting to caretake people, and to, like, the witches live in a pretty patriarchal lifestyle, and be like, how has this badly affected them? How do they want things to be different? How do the women in their lives inspire them to be different? And that was just as much a part of writing them as writing the cool women. And then I was talking about gender flipping things. So
Mm-hmm.
I love a gothic narrative. Like, which is basically like, someone's in a spooky house and supernatural stuff starts happening. And in my book, the LYNBURN Legacy series, that's a gothic thing. That's a gothic narrative. Joanna Russ wrote an essay called "Someone's Trying to Kill Me, and I Think It's My Husband." It's about women in spooky houses, like in Rebecca or Jane Eyre, being like, I'm under threat. But because I'd already decided that the protagonist would be a sassy journalist who would find out what was going on, I was like, well, someone has to be the gothic heroine in the spooky manor under threat. So I was like, all right, my hero will be. So he's like, I'm scared. I'm in my night clothes. I'm maybe being buried alive. Everything's so bad. And at the same time, he's like, he's super badly. He's being raised actually not aristocratic. And so he's like, I've got a motorcycle. I'm pretty buff. I get into fights at school. But that doesn't mean that I'm not terrified in the spooky house. And at one point, he runs away from home, as he would if it's a spooky manor. And the heroine's like, are you a tavern wench now? And he's like, yes, I work at the bar. No, don't say that. But just thinking about how would you do it if the gothic heroine was a guy? And I was like, that's how I'd do it. And so I think a lot of other people think, what would I do if the action hero was a girl? And then we get some very kick-ass ladies. What would you do if the fainting invalid was a boy? Is something I would really like to do soon.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of gender flipping characters, I mean, do you think reframing how stories describe men and boys away from hostile and toxic stereotypes and towards complexity and even vulnerability can be one of the ways that science fiction and fantasy writers can break away from these horrible tropes that promote toxic masculinity and the dehumanization of women?
I think so. I will say there are many male writers who I think are great at writing both men and women, but there are like successful male authors who will talk about, I'm not good at writing women, and that's just embarrassing. Like we are half the world. If you're not good at writing women, you're not good at writing. And the same would go for not being able to write people of color well. I'm like, it's harder to write things that aren't your experience, but like you don't go to the writing game because you're like, yes, it's all going to be easy. just accurately reflecting the world around you and not being like, well, who can tell? Women are mysterious islands surrounded by fog. I don't know.
Oh, Sarah, have you seen the hashtag men writing women?
Yes. Yes, I have. And again, I want to say that like there are really some great writers of male writers of women. Rick Riordan is super good, I think. But that that we have to again hold men and women to the same standards, and like and then in both cases high. Why not? We can be as good as we want to be, and also we can be as cool and evil as we want to be.
Uh, do you think that eventually, the violent alpha male type character would phase out of fantasy as cultures worldwide start addressing toxic masculinity? Or do you think it's one of those stereotypes that would stick around for much longer than expected?
Well, I actually have conflicted feelings about that because, as I was saying earlier, shallow portrayals of anything are just not going to work. I don't think they'll last. And there are many shallow portrayals of like a toxic dude being like, "Hey, do what I say. By the way, I'm a CEO/werewolf." Um, but I do think that people have talked about how, for some people, like Beauty and the Beast can be seen as a power fantasy for women, being like, "This guy is awful." Or this girl is awful. Lesbian Beauty and the Beast is very welcome to me. But I'm the one person who can change them. But also, like, people stay in relationships being like, I can change them, and you're like, you can't. Like, do your best in the situation you're in. And if the person is inspired by you and wants to change themselves, all right, that's a cool fantasy. You do you. If they're a wizard, I mean, it seems kind of too much hassle to me in my personal life, but I do love tales of redemption. But one, I want to see them for women too. There's a new Adventures of Shira in which there's Catra, the lady villainess, is redeemed, and I think that's really great. So I'm all into redeeming villains, and I don't think like toxic boys are going anywhere because I think a lot of characters just are toxic. It's about working through your problems and your pain. A lot of fiction is, but again, shallow portrayals and thoughtless portrayals where you're not like, I'm unconsciously holding up a mirror to society, not thinking about it, or this is just uncomplicatedly a sexy proposition or an alluring proposition, or how men should be. That's where you run into problems. But I don't think we're ever going to have all unproblematic characters, and I don't want them.
Yeah. So I'm gonna. There are some responses to your teaser about your book where the protagonist wakes up as a villainess, and here we go. So Francesca Parga, I love this concept. And Veronica Lobato says that sounds so exciting. I want to read it already. And Christiana Cheryl has the best comments. Oh my God, Villainous is doing a musical number. I must have it.
Well, as it comes to musical numbers, I'm a very bad singer. I sound like a donkey who is like maybe dying, or a vulture who's spied the dead donkey. It's a bad scene. And I'm a very bad poet. In Ireland, we have a lot of poets, so that's very embarrassing for me. I'd be like at parties with Seamus Heaney, God rest his soul, and he'd be like, "So you never thought about it?" And I'd be like, "Oh, you don't even know. I'm not talented in that direction, sir." Also, at one point, I met a short poet. I'm quite tall, so I couldn't quite see his face, and I was like, because being a poet is quite like ill paid. So I was like, "Do you do anything else besides be a poet?" And he's like, "Yes, love." And I was like, "What do you do?" And he was like, "I'm the president, love." And I was like, "Of what?" And he was like, "Of the country, darling." And I was like, "Oh God." So yes, in Ireland, even the poet is a president, but most people know who he is and don't say things like that to him. Very embarrassing moment for me. But I am good at like doggerel. I like a skipping song or like a rhyming thing that will happen. So writing a musical number for a book was really fun for me. I remember Holly Black and she's a friend of mine. We were talking about fairies, and she was saying that fairies always have doggerel, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I could get on with the fairies." And I was just sitting there washing up, and I was yelling at a fairy song to her, and she was like, "Stop, I'm writing it down. Where have you written that?" And I was like, "No, I'm just making it up while I do the washing up." She was like, "Do you remember what you said at the start?" And I was like, "No." So it's just something I'll do in my day-to-day life, be like, "Here's some bad poetry, friends," and they're like, "I guess we have to deal with her." So if you ever read any good poetry in Holly's very good books, that's not me. But if you ever read anything, you're like, "That's kind of bad," maybe a little bit inspired.
Okay, so you know the line between consent and coercion isn't always very clear in fantasy books. Any sort of fantasy, whether it's epic fantasy, urban fantasy, a paranormal romance, or YA fantasy. And do you think this is an issue that writers in the fantasy genre have started tackling successfully in recent years?
I think people are trying. I mean, I think it's tricky because, okay, so back in, the 80s, there would be many a romance novel in which a lady was like, if you say yes, it makes it's means that you're, a certain way. And so people would be like, I don't want to say yes, but I want the sexy thing to happen. But you don't want to portray your character that way. So it's just, again, it's like a question of like, how do we shift the balance in orally? Because like, sometimes people can want to be seized and kissed, but like if they had like a lead up to that where everything seemed to be going great, maybe. But also normalize checking in, normalize that being sexy, being like, hey, I'm just asking you a fun question. I remember in the LYNBURN Legacy thinking very much about that, being like, these are two characters they used to be able to read each other's minds and they were each other's imaginary friends and they no longer could. So it's interesting to me to think like, we really are used to knowing what the other person wants, but now we don't know. So we really have to be mindful about checking in. And that was a fun way for me to literalize things like nobody knows if you're even seeing the same color red as another person. I mean, maybe the other person is aware shrimp and they see like 36 colors. Did you know shrimp can see 36 colors? Like, or maybe more? So many colors.
That reminds me when when you mentioned that they can read each other's minds. Like I actually burst out cackling when they were in the elevator and they realized that they were them.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that they were talking to each other in their minds and they were standing next to each other, but they didn't realize it until then. And I burst out laughing.
I'm so glad. I love the idea of a meet cute, but I also like the idea of a meet ooh, where you're just like, oh, this is very bad for some reason. Or even like, what an interesting situation we found ourselves in, in an inn with only one bed, or, in this duel to the death for this thing we both want. Like the thinking about a meet ooh is something I do a lot. And so that's another writing tip for the writers in the audience. To be like,
Yeah,
what's really interesting?
I must say that the way they reacted to each other was hilarious. It was just, I wasn't expecting it. I was expecting them to kind of be surprised and, just settle in. But it took them a while to get used to it. I suppose that's more realistic because, this is the voice that you've been hearing in your head since you were a little kid. And then suddenly that voice has a body standing next to you.
G.K. Chesterton said that fantasy is real life written in scarlet and gold. And C.S. Lewis said that fairy stories exist not to teach children, that there are dragons, but the dragons can be defeated. And so I always think about fantasy as that, like shedding a light on things and being like, in finding out that, your imaginary friend is the real person, it was really fun for me to think, about a girl and a guy being like really physically conscious of each other for the first time in the way that you kind of are when like your body is changing and you're having new relationships to people in the world. Like I remember being a teen and being like unexpectedly put in an airplane next to a boy and I was like, the boy, I don't know him. Oh my goodness. And like I was used to boys, but it just felt like weird that one time. And sometimes it can, and being like, here is like a way to shine a light on that relatable experience, but writing it large in the sky is like what I think all fantasy is about. It's about telling us about our feelings about dragons or otherwise.
Yeah. So let's go for another round of comments and questions from the audience. So, okay. So Milsey has a really interesting question. So a lot of people interpret Seiji's point of view as the thought process of an autistic coded character. Was this something you did intentionally? I absolutely love the fans novels you wrote.
Thank you so much. So the fence novels, one moment, are striking distance and disarmed. And they're set in the world of C.S. Pacat and Joanna the Mad's fence graphic novels, which are about an elite boarding school and the fencing team in it and their relationships to other fencing teams. And they're coming together as really different people on a fencing team. And C.S. Pacat is a friend of mine. I went to Australia to live for a few years ago, and I was a big fan of her Captive Prince novels, and she was a fan of my writing, and so she connected with me and was like, okay, we'll do fun things together. She took me out riding. I'm a truly terrible writer. We talked about fencing. I am a truly terrible fencer. This is just a list of me being bad at things, but I'm always very enthusiastic. We were on board a pirate ship at one point, and we would talk a lot about writing, which I hope I'm better at than I am at fencing. And so when she reached out to me and was like, oh, I was thinking of you for this, would you be interested? And at first I was like, oh, I had another commitment. And she was like, that's okay, I'll wait. And I was like, oh my gosh. So it was really nice to be chosen for that, and to, have to be able to collaborate with another friend, because I've done that with quite a few of my friends. And I really don't think of writing as an ivory tower experience at all. I think I'm always thinking about my readers, and I'm like, oh, will they cry or will they laugh when I'm reading? And so, like, having my friends as first readers or as people I'm coming up with things for is so great and such an honor. So it's really great to come up with these books with Kat and think about the way I could help, what I could contribute to. So I was like, let's talk about coming together as a team, because I love friendships. Let's talk about really bad dates. And I was like, how about fake dating? I love fake dating. Kat was like, all right, so no, she was in for it. But I do want to be really conscious that they aren't my characters, as with the Sabrina and Winks characters. So I wouldn't want to define a character that I didn't create, but I do often think about characters being neurotypical. I'm not neurotypical myself, and you say in other lands, I don't think a lot of those characters are neurotypical, but they can't be diagnosed because they live in this fantasy land. So I'm like, I think there's a place there for characters who can be read into, but I also think there's a place for distinct representation, and no writer should ever get credit unless the representation's there on the page. I do think it's great that in the Fence novels there is a character, Assistant Coach Lewis, who is diagnosed as not neurotypical, and I'm really glad that Seiji has connected. And I have heard people say that, but I've also heard people say it when it comes to like just being like very focused, being a gifted child. So if Seiji was my character, I could say something, but as she's not, I don't. But I am really grateful that that people have connected with him, and he is my favorite point of view to write in the Fence novels. I really love Seiji, so thanks. Sorry if I couldn't answer definitively.
Okay, so just a couple more comments. So Francesca Parga says, still missing the magical lost text of the Nick Seiji one bit scene. And
sometimes I go too far. Sometimes the Cat was just like, all right, girl, great idea, but we're gonna have two beds. And I was like,
Christiana says, oh my gosh, regarding consent, the Can I scene in May was one of the sexiest scenes ever. Consent can be so sexy. And she followed that up with, please write a story.
Thank you. The unmade scene, I got into a little trouble with that actually once. A girl wrote to me and was like, hey, I read the scene. What did he mean, can I? What was he trying to do? And I was like, yeah, I can't tell you because your mom might be mad at me. And I do think, parents get to say, although my parent just gave me everything and occasionally like, mother, that's inappropriate. I'm 9. So that was my experience, but it means that I don't fully understand the feelings that parents have, but I really respect them. So I was like, I can't say this out of respect to your mother and your father, both of whom may have an opinion. But also, if a boy doesn't do it, maybe he's not the one. Just a thought.
So let's move on to talking about stories. So stories are one of the most powerful ways of bringing about cultural change. So in your opinion, how can authors strike a balance in their storytelling between raising awareness about violence against women if they decide to tackle that theme, while telling an engaging story without being pedantic or preachy?
I think it's thinking about the real world and the accurate portrayal of it, but the accurate and thoughtful portrayal of it. And realizing, when it's a sensitive topic, think about it 3 times as much. I don't think that anyone is ever like, this world, it could really use less thinking about. Like if you're going to do that. And also being like, have we enough of that? Shauna McGuire, who is a writer I really love and a friend, is says that she's just not going to write sexualized violence against women because there's plenty of that, and there are plenty other things to write about. And it also is like to show that you don't have to write about that stuff to be realistic, but you should also write about what you want to write about, but always thoughtfully, I would say. But I don't think we should see any topic as taboo. Although, also, if you don't like a topic, don't feel like you should write about it either, because I do think sincerity comes through, love comes through, and the topics you really care about are the topics you're going to write best about.
Do you think it's important for influential authors such as yourself, who are read all over the world, to make a conscious effort to include characters in your stories that show readers the importance of respecting women as equals and as human beings?
I do think so. I don't know about being an influential author, but I think that everyone who writes should consider the possibility that, like, anything they could write could reach someone. I know that people have like had my writing mean a lot to them, and that means a lot to me. But also, like, J.K. Rowling and Stephanie Meyer didn't know they were going to be like stratosphere famous, and that's like a responsibility that you should always be like, this could reach way past the bounds that I think so. So what am I saying? What do I really mean? Like, commit to the sincerity, because I do think sometimes people are like, oh, sincerity is not, it's not cool, or it's kind of embarrassing. It can be really embarrassing to sort of like unbutton yourself mentally or emotionally for the world, especially as a woman, because again, like, people like read and stuff. I remember one guy was just like, oh, she wrote she wrote the heroine of the Demon's Lexicon series, which is my first series. She wrote her as thin because she isn't thin, and I was like, well, I'm not thin, but also the character is actually not thin. I was like, I was writing her as fatter than me, but you just didn't notice because she was a heroine, so of course she was thin. But then I was like, well, like, let's engage with that, with how women feel about their bodies. And I was suddenly like, here I am on Twitter talking about how I feel about my own weight and about how I feel about this girl's weight, because she had a different body to me. And just being like, I feel open to this. Like, because in some ways writing books is opening the door to your heart or your imagination and inviting other people to come in. And you will have like clashes, but if you're in there respectfully, and if you're trying to be honest with them and they're trying to be honest with you, and you are again trying to represent things as they really are, if you have respect for your characters, not everybody will have respect for them. Just like if you have respect for yourself, not everybody will have respect for you, but people will be more likely to, and you'll be more likely to find the people who will. But
All
that's
right.
just
So, since we're talking about writing, so now here come the writing questions from the audience. So, let's do this. So, Indigo Joe wants to know, how does it work to write collaboratively with other authors?
I would say it's different every time. In With the Sabrina series, it was like there's the Archie Comics factor as well as the Netflix factor. So I would be talking to like two teams, but also they were like, we are a well-oiled machine. We have been doing this for decades. And I was like, all right, let's tell you what to do. Oh, can I do this? And they were like, no. I was like, can I talk to the actors? And they were like, if they'll talk to you. And I was like, they will. Woo! So just trying to get a lot of people on board with one singular vision. But again, like, it being like an already working machine, like, taught me a lot about it. Whereas like working with my friends, we'll just sit there and be like, do you think that'll be cool? No, maybe not. Or with CSP Cap, because we were both locked down in our respective countries. I'm in Ireland, she's in Australia, and we'd be like Skyping, and occasionally I'd be like, sorry, my cat knocked the phone off the table while I was taking notes, and she was like, I've just been staring at your kitten for like 10 minutes, and I was like, sorry. But you also do like get into a deep dive about characters or stories or like the stakes you want. Kat is really good about talking about stakes, and so being like, okay, what do you want? Here's what I want. And also being like, reading out like lists of the things you like is like very interesting. And then you'll find an overlap and being like, oh, okay, we both like, dramatic scenes where there's a storm behind them, or we like a sword fight, and to see what that says about someone. And sometimes it's just like a running joke between you that like gets put there. I remember in one story, we were like, who invented glitter? And we like wrote a whole scene that was just everyone laughing about inventing glitter and then taking down the dialogue that we just literally said. So with your friends, it can be an easier process, but then down the line, you're like, oh, we better formalize that. So it can be really great collaboration, but it's also like something to be really careful about, being like, this is how it's going to work. And again, being respectful to each other and respectful to their vision.
Okay, so Naninda asks, for defense novels, what kind of research do you do regarding the sport, and how long did you spend researching before you started the writing process?
Well, as I said, I already took fencing, so I was lucky to have some basics already. But it was interesting because neither C.S. Paquette or I are American, so I was like wanting to learn more about American fencing. So I read, there's one book that Seiji is reading in Fence Disarm that I also read. It's very good. There's also, I was in touch with the Peter Westbrook Foundation, which is about, which encourages especially Black fencers, because fencing is still a quite exclusive sport that's like seen as is done in the exclusive schools and thus more accessible to people with privilege. And the Peter Westbrook Foundation was set up to help African American fencers succeed in a world that was extremely white. And so I talked about them, and there were several fencers talked to me to like Wright Harvard, who was the captain of the team and was African American. So part of it was just like, how is fencing existing in the real world? And then also I was like, okay, here we are fencing past my level. There's a coach called Olga Velma, who is Russian, but it's living in Ireland. And so I both was like, I would be like, so here's my fencing scene. Does it work? And she's like, these people are not doing things by the rules. That's terrible. And I was like, okay, but if they're breaking the rules on purpose, she's like, they shouldn't. I was like, okay, but for narrative purposes, what can I do? So it was a challenge to get up to speed, and I think that Kat and Joanna do amazingly within the graphic novels. Whereas I wasn't, because you don't want the graphic novels to like suddenly be like, it's missing a chunk of the competition. So my matches were more about informal matches that got to underline people's feelings, but at the same time, you still end up gathering, like you gather so much knowledge, and then about 1/10 of it ever appears on page. But you hopefully by gathering the other 9/10, you hopefully give an impression that you're confident about your work. That's how research works.
Okay, so one more question, and then we'll go on to the next question from us. But okay, so Veronica Lobato wants to know, which was your favorite book and character to write?
Which is my favorite book and character? I mean, that's like the Times, the originals. I love picking favorites, but I'd want to narrow it down a bit more. But I loved, I mean, it's often always the latest, because the latest is the one where you're most like yourself. You're like, this is my new thing that I'm hoping everyone will love. So I love writing my latest, and I hope you guys will love reading it. I loved writing Unspoken because I love Cami. I love writing the Sabrina books because it was getting back to writing for me for the first time in like a few years. And it was so exciting to know there were still people who'd like to hear my stories. So I have a lot of favorites, but I will categorize them another time.
All right. So let's talk about geek culture. So geek culture in general, including science fiction and fantasy, has had its share of critics saying that it's still too male-dominated, despite a rising number of prominent, well-respected, and well-known female authors and creators. Plus, there is still plenty of hostile, misogynist, and sexist behavior by male geeks towards female geeks. So what do you think needs to be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's comics or gaming or books, more welcoming for women and girls?
I mean, many things, as with everything. I'm like, with society, it's all of a piece. When we change one thing, we influence other things. But I would say that a major thing in geek culture is that we just need to stop mocking fangirls. Because people are like, oh, look, they love Twilight. Oh, look, they love One Direction. Oh, look, they love C-dramas. And that's fine. It's great. Like, I'm not saying like people can go overboard, but also people go overboard when they're fans of football. They are killing each other. And people don't make fun of them in the same way. So just being like, yes, women are engaging in things that they love, and that's not embarrassing. They shouldn't be making a sandwich instead. Having passion and also having a female community which is passionate about fiction is a glorious thing that needs to be celebrated. And like male musicians will be like, oh, they rise on women and then are like, let's please get a male audience, and then they cater to them. Or Star Trek got renewed because women loved the show and wrote in about it, and then suddenly they were like, maybe this is for boys. And so we need to start thinking about female passion as valuable and respect it. And that is really, I think, will be a real help to geek culture. Stop being embarrassed, ladies. You're great.
Yeah, and do you know that Lucille Ball was the one who saved Star Trek?
Yeah, exactly. And like Dolly Parton is doing so much and was seen as, and people made fun of her for like decades. And she's promoted literacy, and she helped fund Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
She's cool. Dolly's
so cool. I'm glad we now know Dolly's cool, that everybody knows. As a country music fan, I've thought so for a long time.
Yeah. So we've come to the final couple questions of the session. So you have been so very incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work as a whole. So here's a Captain Obvious question, which we ask everybody. Why do you support the cause to end violence against women?
I mean, so it's like, people are like, in the same way, people are like, well, not all men. They're like, I support violence against anyone, but the violence against women is a huge problem. More women are killed by their partners, men who are supposed to love them, than are killed than any soldiers are killed in war. The lockdown across the world has led to a steep rise in domestic violence because women can't get away, men are invasion in their homes. Like, it's something that's dramatic because it's a huge problem. And by acknowledging the problem, it's the first step to addressing it.
Mm-hmm. And finally, what do you think authors can do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate violence against women and girls?
I mean, we can't do as much as I wish we could. My mother, for many years, ran a well women centre in Ireland. One of my best friends in Ireland is a social worker who's dealing with the current flood of domestic violence. And like, I am not skilled at any of that. It's just like being a medical person. I would just be bad at it. But like, what we can do is think, about our responsibility, about how society, no man is an island, as they say, about how we're ringing bells by writing stories that can be heard for a much greater distance than we think. And what are we, just being thoughtful about our contribution to the world and thinking about the kind of world that we want it to be.
So I'm going to put myself back on screen now because some of you joined us a little late, so you probably think of me as this disembodied voice of the
He's a great face. Let's see the face.
Okay, hi everybody. Before we wrap up, let Sarah and I tell you again about these goodies that Sarah has ready over at our fundraising page, and we'll be sharing a slide shortly showing you the link to how to get to the fundraising page. So Sarah has donated a whole bunch of goodies. So she actually donated 2 book bundles, but one has already gone. So I'll tell you about the one that's left. So it's Sarah Rees Brennan's Magical Women Book Bundle. So this book bundle has the entire paperback set of The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. So there's 3 of them. And 1 paperback edition of Fate the Winged Saga. And Sarah will sign it and personalize it for you. And she will send it to you anywhere you are in the world. Just make sure to give us an address that works, a mailing address that works. Otherwise, it's not going to get to you. And also, speaking of Christiana's cute little comment just now about writing stories about weird shrimp, you might be interested in this, Christiana. So Sarah is offering to write a drabble, or what we call a 100-word microstory, a 100-word microstory for 15 generous donors. So the drabble will feature a character of the donor's choice from any one of Sarah's books and be handwritten and signed by Sarah. So it'll be your very own Sarah Rees Brennan story in 100 words, handwritten by Sarah, signed, and you can keep it as a keepsake. And there are two versions of this goodie. So the first version is you can just get the Drabble as a standalone treat. That's just the story. Or you can get the Drabble paired with an e-arc copy of the Pixel Project's first charity anthology, Giving the Devil His Due. Now, for option two, while Sarah writes the story for you, the Pixel Project will send you the e-arc. So you have a choice of MOBI, EPUB, or PDF format. And it was just released on the 1st of September. And you can enjoy tales by some of today's foremost names in science fiction, fantasy, and horror, including Stephen Graham Jones, Christina Henry, Lee Murray, and Hilary Monahan. And these goodies are finite. So whatever's there is there, and Sarah's goodies are available. Sarah's goodies are available first come, first served. So if you want your story, Christiana, if you want your Reframing story, you might want to check out our fundraiser. And I'm going to share this. Hopefully you can see this.
It's a long time since I wrote fan fiction, but I'll do my best, guys.
Okay, so I'm going to share this right now. Can you see it? Okay, I'm going to hide the banners. Can you see it? Okay, so you can go to, and this is all case sensitive, is bit.ly/R4P Rally App 2021. And Anusha is going to put the link in the chat box as well, so you can just do one click to get there. And you can find out more about Read for Pixels at bit.ly/Read for Pixels. And if you can check out all the other goodies by all the other authors when you get there, and they include goodies by Arkady Martin, Ginny Lin, Paul Tremblay, Sebastian de Castell, and more. And new goodies will be released every week through this September. So once you get to that page, if you're curious about what's coming up over the next few weeks, please bookmark it, because we release new goodies every Friday. And please give generously to help us reach our $5,000 goal. All funds go towards our work to end violence against women. And also, we mentioned the anthology. So we'll tell you now how to get the anthology. You can get it from Amazon Kobo, Google Play, Book Depository, and all other major booksellers worldwide. If you want to find out more about it, you can go to bit.ly/giving the devil his due. And if you would like an exclusive book plate to go with your paperback of the anthology, we have teamed up with 12 of the 16 authors to offer an exclusive limited edition anthology book plate for early bird buyers. Each author will only sign 16 book plates, and it'll be first come, first served. And each book plate includes a resource for domestic violence and sexual assault victims and survivors in 205 countries. Now, all net proceeds from the anthology will go towards keeping the Pixel Project's campaigns, programs, and initiatives such as Read for Pixels alive and kicking. And I'm going to... Oh, look!
I just wanted her to say bye to the lovely people. Guys, thank you so much for watching us and supporting the Pixel Project.
Yeah. Oh, and if y'all want to find out more about violence against women and what you can do about it, please visit our website at www.thepixelproject.net. And Sarah, do you have any announcements? What's coming up in the next 3 months? Do you have anything coming up in the next 3 months?
My next thing is Lighting the Fire, the Wink Saga prequel. And it's not quite sure when it will come out because, COVID and everything. They're filming the series now, and they would like the book to come out a little bit before the series. So it'll either be out in early next year or late this year. It's already written and squared away, and I hope you guys will enjoy it.
Right. So Sarah and I will bid you all good day or good night. Have a great Sunday. And for those of you in the US, enjoy the long weekend. It's Labor Day weekend in the US now. So
Happy Labor Day
They're having
weekend,
the day off
guys.
tomorrow.
Nice.
So have a really great time, everybody, and have a good start to the weekend. Please, please stay safe. We're still in the middle of a pandemic.
Be safe, be happy. Thank you guys so much.